Nobody's using this set, this beautiful set that we got up here. I've got this one. Hi, everybody. So you just heard a lot of words. Hopefully we'll give you some context for those words. The first thing I want to do, though, is to thank you. If you ever see these in slides that come at the very end of a presentation, but seriously, it's like 9-something in the morning, it's a Thursday, it's a beautiful day outside, maybe you haven't had a lot of breakfast, so really, it's great to be able to be here, and I really thank you guys for taking the time to do this. So that won't come at the end, it'll come here. Hope that's okay with you. So you heard a little bit about the confusion of all these words that he was talking about. So I'm Eric Solomon, head of strategy and insights. This is really what's on my card at a place called the Zoo, which is part of Google, and I sit in the YouTube office. It's all very, very confusing. We're a very complex organization. So I thought just to make it more confusing, what I would do is try to put up what the Zoo is. We're a group not only that is a separate group, but we're within Google that has a different logo, which pisses off our marketing department more than you could ever imagine. But we're essentially a creative team, I put it up there so I don't mess this up, that partners with brands and brands agencies to creatively and effectively exploit the potential of the Google and YouTube platform, technologies, and creative resources. It's quite a mouthful. In other words, we help brands and agencies do cool shit on Google and YouTube. I happen to sit in the YouTube office, so I have a proclivity for really liking YouTube. Okay, blah, 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 a lot about what the Zoo is. I think a more interesting question is why the Zoo, and I used to have a lot of kind of explanations about that, but I think the best way is really just to play this.
All right, so here we are in front of the elephants. Cool thing about these guys is that they have really, really, really long fronts, and that's cool. And that's pretty much all there is to say.
Yeah. So that's Jawed Karim. He's one of the founders of YouTube. This is the first video that was uploaded to YouTube. You may have noticed that if the date, you can't really see the date, but this was in 2005, so a mere 9 years ago, nothing more than him telling you that elephants have long trunks in the San Diego Zoo, I believe that is. It's kind of amazing because you started to see a little bit about this, but these are numbers that actually blow my mind, and you feel it sitting in the YouTube headquarters with 6 billion hours per month are viewed on YouTube. You heard about 1 billion unique visitors, 100 hours uploaded, blah, blah, blah. But like the one that blows my mind is at any given point, 20% or 1/5 of all internet data traffic is being consumed by people watching that stuff. And it is amazing. It blows my mind, and you feel that energy coming through at the headquarters, which is why I get excited. So I guess it goes without saying, this is a no duh, this is like saying water's wet, but we've been in the midst of a digital revolution for a long time, and that's part of the reason why Google invested in a group like the Zoo. That's not interesting. What I think is interesting is why this is happening, and I think it's interesting. A couple of these are, again, a little bit no duh, but when something's up on YouTube, we used to think about being able to target in some way, but if it's up there, people will find it. And that's the amazing thing about the platform is it doesn't matter, you're global no matter what on that platform, and you're global no matter what on the internet. And then, you know, this idea of accessibility, people are doing this across every screen. People my age and people younger don't care where they're watching stuff. It doesn't matter at all, and I think it's easy to forget that. There's really no such thing as one TV anymore. The one that I think is most interesting, though, is this idea of universal authorship, which is this idea that we probably all feel that no matter what exists out in the world, we have a right to add to it in some way. This is why sites like Yelp exist. It's why, you know, everybody has a right to opinion, and the whole world feels this right to author whatever's being put out there. So it's no longer about putting out messages. So a couple interesting things that are happening. For this reason, and I hope to show you some examples of this, I really think of advertising as about this idea of orchestrating things, not just integrating things. So I don't know, I sat in a couple of creative agencies before I worked at Google, and you know, you go in there as a lead creative agency, and you'd have this 60-second TV spot, and you'd sit, and all the agencies would be sitting around the room, and the digital agency would be, great, we're gonna take that TV spot and put it up on YouTube, check the box, digital's done. And that was all there was to it. These days, I think of our jobs as so much more about how does all of this crap go together? how loud do you let a Twitter feed go before you introduce a YouTube video? Or is it a YouTube video, or do you go with mass media? And how big do you go? And how many, what are you looking to do? And it really is this orchestration of all of these things. So I hope to show some examples of how that comes to life. Another thing that I like to say is kind of like water in a bottle. This idea of content these days is very liquid. So what you're able to do in traditional media is very much bounded by the space, right? But in things like YouTube, there's no space limitations. In things like Twitter, you're confined and also liberated by a 144-character tweet. And that liquidity has to go with no matter who you're trying to reach to say, how does that content conform to the best medium? So another interesting thing that's going on. Another kind of principle that we talk about a lot is this idea of audience being dead. And I like to think of it as dead because it suggests by its very nature that it's passive, right? That somebody's just sitting there taking in whatever we're doing, and they're just sitting there and they're kind of blank-eyed and zoning out, eating their popcorn. But I like to call these people users, even if that has negative connotations in some circles. But I think of people as users because people are using advertising in very particular ways now and using the internet in very particular ways. Not only that, but I think we could all agree we're pretty damn demanding. Louis C.K. has some nice videos about this, but we don't just, consume it. We consume it where we want it, when we want it, how we want it, and we're very, very demanding as consumers. I think all of this makes the difficulty of how all this crap goes together very, very, very complicated. And I think it's part of my job to figure out how that works. So the part that I want to kind of lead in with is this idea that if it was passive before, consuming content now is a very, very active thing. We're actively doing it. And for that reason, for brands, the idea of interrupting can no longer work. I don't think it works for anybody to try to interrupt. There's too much out there. So what I think it's about is about providing something. And it's not just providing something like a coupon, right? It's providing something that's relevant, contextual, compelling content, not advertising. And that's why a lot of the stuff you're going to see, it blurs that line between what advertising is and what content is and how all this stuff goes together. The other word that you heard about was this thing called hypertelling. And it's a little bit of a story. I hope nobody's heard of this word because we kind of just made it up. But it came about where it was this conversation. Anybody tried to explain what you do to your mom or your dad, and it gets like you have these like conversations from outer space, you're trying to simplify it, and it's not going anywhere. So my mom asked, she's in a retirement home up in Oregon, she's, getting on in years, and she's just said, what do you do? And I was like, oh God, here we go, we're gonna have this conversation. And I was like, okay, very simply, help brands and their agencies tell stories. She goes, oh, okay, so, storytelling. And I was like, well, kind of, but storytelling's different now. And she asked very wisely, well, what's different about it? And I don't know why I did a deep voice for my mom. She doesn't have a deep voice. What's different about it? And I said, well, like these days, it's not so much about just telling a story if you're an influencer or you're a brand. It's what happens to that story after you tell it. What do people do with it? Do people share it? Do they comment on it? Do they make something else from it? And she said after that, oh, kind of like hyperlinks. And I was like, I have no clue what you're talking about. I was like, I have absolutely no idea how she went from that to hyperlinks. But I was like, oh, she's like, you click on one thing and it takes you to another thing. And I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. So I was like, okay, we'll call it hypertelling, Mom. Why not? I'll give it to you. We're hyperactive. Everything's hyperlinked. We're hyperinformed. We're hyperconnected. I don't think our job anymore is to be storytellers. I think we're hypertellers. And there's lots of ways this can come to life, but given that I like YouTube a lot, and given that we're talking about influencers, a couple of categories that I want to talk about in these areas of creating, curating, collaborating, and orchestrating. So I'm going to take you through some stuff. Hopefully it's interesting. Okay, I want to talk about creation. It's kind of like, there's like 7 or 8 kinds of jokes in the world. There's like a billion ways to create content. I'm going to just focus on 3 of them. Hero kind of content, stunt kind of content, and snackable kind of content. First of all, I don't know how old everybody else was in 1987, but my favorite show happened to have been branded content.
Welcome to Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. One of the largest turtles in the world is the giant loggerhead.
Oh, the loggerhead. Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And this was, this was a pretty novel idea in 1987 of creating branded content. Now it's very interesting because you're seeing brands do things in long form that's also content in ways. There was Dumb Ways to Die, which was a very nice piece, it was highly awarded. There were, of course, Dove Sketches, is that advertising, is it content? There was Jean-Claude Van Damme doing the splits on trucks, is that advertising, is it content? And then, of course, there was Felix Baumgartner jumping out of airplane well above the earth, the most live-streamed in history. One thing I wanted to do, though, is for all of those kind of things, those big case studies, there's a billion case studies you can read to look at that stuff, and they're pretty dazzling marketing case studies on this stuff. What I wanted to do is just really concentrate on stuff that really resonated with me and helped tell this story. So I'm going to try as much as I can to stay away from those bigger stories, because you can read a lot about them if you've got questions, great articles. So I want to cast back to 2011 and Chipotle. I think Chipotle is a very interesting case because they're a brand that in 2010 were just kind of another fast food chain. They didn't really have a differentiation. And in 2011, they started to build this back to the start thing, and they had a very nice Willie Nelson song, and they started to build this ethos of how do you start to cultivate a better world through organic farming. And it was a very nice video, and they really put in a good portion, if not 100% of their marketing budget against doing this because it's a very high, high production value. It looks great, it's quite long, got Willie Nelson on board. They could have stopped there, but what's remarkable, so this is 2011, right? In 2013, 2 years later, rather than sort of losing the plot and just throwing that out there as a one-off, they take their time, very much like the entertainment industry, and said, okay, we're gonna release a second version of this. This time, it was a little bit more, it was darker and a little more dystopian. You have Fiona Apple covering a song from Willy Wonka. It's another very beautiful film. But if you sort of watch it kind of play to the end, what's very different about it this time is that this whole thing is essentially ends up being a trailer to go download the game of this on either your Apple or your Android phone. So you've got the whole cultivate a better world thing, and then they pan out, and you see that this whole thing is really meant to be a downloadable experience on your thing. So again, 2 years later, they've realized that the context changed a little bit. It's not just about what people are doing with their message, but what else they can do with it to extend it. I think they could have stopped there. In 2014, they took it to another level. This time, they partnered with Hulu. This was 2014. This was about in February. And they started doing things, got away from animation. This time, they partnered with Hulu and did 4 30-minute content series all about this whole world that they created about cultivating a better world. I'll be honest with you. I don't know anybody that wants to watch 2 hours worth of Chipotle content marketing, but I love that it's created this controversy. Is this entertainment or is it marketing propaganda? And I think that conversation is a conversation we're going to be seeing a lot more of. So Chipotle's been the long story of it, but I think what they've done from a hero content perspective has been pretty remarkable. I do want to move on to something that I like even more, which is stunts. So the whole idea with stunts, people think, oh, these are going to go away, experiential marketing, well, who does that anymore? But you might have remembered in 2012, TNT put this push to add drama thing in the middle of the square in Belgium. Mayhem ensued, lots of crazy stuff happened, people went out of control. But the whole idea is in 2012, what you can do is record the whole thing happening, put it up on YouTube, and have 10 million people watch it. So it's not just about telling an experience, but it's giving me a story to share. And that's kind of the amazing thing about it. I've got a friend at the Escape Pod, Vinny, and he summed it up pretty well, which is why stunts are never going to go away, which is like the internet really is about the exceptional, and I'll let you read the rest for yourself. So that's one very interesting story. Is anybody in the room familiar with the brand Bodyform? Okay. It's an English brand. I wasn't familiar either. In the 80s, they made this kind of advertising.
Bodyform Invisible. Ultra thin, ultra reliable. Less is most definitely more.
Yeah, from Mexican food to women hygiene products. You get a little of everything. Bodyform, not a brand that was very big, not a brand that most people even had heard of, but this guy in Ireland had heard of him, and his name was Richard Neal. On October 8th, 2012, he put quite a post up on Bodyform's Facebook page, which, to give you some excerpts of, essentially, he watched all these advertisements. You've lied to me as a child. I liked them so much. What a wonderful time of the month. Then I got a girlfriend. Oh, I was so happy. I was going to see blue water and wings. On and on this guy goes. He even does their, whoa, body form thing. And then thanks for setting me up for a fail body form, you crafty bugger. I love it. I love it. So this actually happened. There was some thoughts about the veracity of this post. It turned out this is a real guy. He actually did this. And a lot of people, as you can see, liked it and commented on it. Man, if you're a brand, there's a lot of things you can do to respond to this. I think what Bodyform did is amazing.
Hello, Richard. I'm Caroline Williams, the CEO of Bodyform. We read your Facebook post with interest, but also a sense of foreboding, and I think it's time we came clean. We lied to you, Richard, and I want to say sorry. Sorry. What you've seen in our advertisements so far isn't a factual representation of events. You're right. The flagrant use of visualization such as skydiving, rollerblading and mountain biking, you forgot horse riding, Richard, are actually metaphors. They're not real. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but there's no such thing as a happy period. The reality is, some people simply can't handle the truth. In the past, we've tried to be more honest in our approach. In the 1980s, we ran a series of focus groups to help us gauge the public's reaction to periods. The cramps, the mood swings, the insatiable hunger. And yes, Richard, the blood coursing from our uteri like a crimson landslide. So, we knew we'd have to change our strategy. And so, from that day to this, we have managed to maintain this illusion. But you, Richard, have torn down that veil and exposed this myth, thereby exposing every man to a reality we hoped they would never have to face. You did that, Richard. You. Well done. I just hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us. Oh, sorry, Richard. You did know that we do that too, didn't you? Hello, Caroline Williams. Yes.
I mean, really, it's amazing because, I mean, this happened 8 days from the Facebook post to putting it up on YouTube, and I think I read that the biggest expense was hiring somebody to play the CMO or the CEO because they didn't have one that could do that, obviously. But I mean, really, what a bold kind of way about taking something and flipping it on its head and really listening to what's going on. A couple other areas that I wanted to point out is the area of snackables. And I wanted to point out Farmers Insurance, not a brand that gets a lot of love, created this whole series called 15 Seconds of Smart.
Hey, Helen, your account has been hacked. Somebody guess your password.
Well, how did they know? I picked something so random.
Was it dolphin?
I gotta take this. Hello? Hi, Gary. No, I'm not having a good day.
I mean, so they created about 10 or so of these about things so boring like password security and, don't leave your stuffed animal close to a heater and all of that stuff, and created a whole kind of ecosystem around doing this 15 seconds of content and had a great media strategy to go with it and really kind of brought it to life. If 15 seconds is too long for you in this kind of snackable area, think about what you might do if you were a German radio station and you had just devastated Brazil in the World Cup. And 9 seconds later, you're done. And you're out. And that couldn't have cost very much money to do. So the whole point here is that I think when people think about brand-created content, they think it's got to be Jean-Claude Van Damme doing the splits on Volvo trucks or a guy jumping out of an airplane. I don't think so. I think that hero content, big content, doesn't have to be epic. It just has to be right. It has to be right for whatever brand you're working on, for what the moment is. And in this case, I think that hypertelling means that every post that's out there, even if it's not as amazing as the Bodyform Facebook post, it's an invitation for conversation. And as a brand and as influencers who play a role, if you're trying to create dialogue, awesome, but you should also think about how can you respond to the dialogue that's out there. That's in the bucket of creation. That's the longest bucket, just so you know. I want to take you through some other buckets, though, because it's not just all about creating content. I want to talk about curation, and I want to talk about this idea of life in narration, which I don't know if that exists anywhere else, but the way I think about it is sort of like we all experience, did you really have breakfast unless you posted about eating breakfast? Are you here right now unless you're responding to the hashtag? It gets a little bit... I think confusing to know where the line should be drawn there. I think that one of the best examples I've seen of life in narration, and I don't mean to turn this back on YouTube, but I love what we did with this Life in a Day film, which was directed by Kevin McDonald and produced by Ridley Scott. And this happened in 2011, but I get asked about user-generated content a lot sitting in the YouTube office, and when I think of a really stunning example, I think of something like this.
Good morning, everyone.
Hola. I really love my family.
Oh my God!
I love football.
Do you both promise to love and treasure each other?
We do.
I'm afraid of losing this place.
I fear
any kind of monster.
Dogs.
Growing up.
Politics scares me more than anything.
Stay safe.
When I close my eyes, I can see all different people in the world. I can feel it, I can touch it, I can see it.
Best day ever.
Ending on that guy. It's funny because the ask here was simply send us a clip of what's going on in your day, and you have a chance to be in a movie. And even this trailer itself was culled down from, I think, 83,000 submissions or something. But it's a question I get with user-generated content all the time, which is like, okay, I want to ask people to tell me everything about their life, and we're going to give them a coupon for $1 off at Starbucks. And you're like, no, that's not going to get anybody to upload anything. Like, you want to be in a movie, you're going to get people to upload. So you have to calibrate the ask. When you're crowdsourcing anything, you have to calibrate the ask to the reward. And I think it's very easy to forget that. Like, people aren't going to disrupt their lives to make your life better. They're not going to do that. There are brands that understand this. In fact, I think GoPro's entire marketing strategy is based off of this. Every 2 minutes, a piece of GoPro created content's uploaded to YouTube. About 85% of that content's from users, which then GoPro then uses in their marketing activity because it's part of the permissions that they're able to have. Yeah, they have a product that allows them to do that, but in terms of taking crowdsourcing ideas from other people, they're doing an amazing job. Again, lots and lots of case studies you can read on GoPro. Another example that I'm showing you mostly because I really like ABBA, but it's a way of curating heritage. So ABBA's got a rich heritage. They kind of said, how can we show this heritage in a visual way? And they created this to come out with their Essential collection. stop on that song because really that's the best one. So the point of doing that is that, you know, curation doesn't just have to be from people themselves. It can be from also your own heritage. So I think this idea through the lens of narration, whether you have amazing products, whether you want to look at heritage, whether you just want to look at the zeitgeist, we're seeing entire brands being built off of the power of how do you curate the content that already exists out in the world. And it's simply looking and seeing what exists and how can we use that in a cool way. And I think what this form of hypertelling does is really all about education, entertainment, or informing. And the trick is how do you tap into people's passions without disrupting them from what they're doing. So Life in a Day, I think, is a good example. It's like, just upload what you're doing right now and we might use it. That's pretty cool. Okay, that's kind of what I've got to say about curation. I want to talk a little about, I don't want to spend too much time because you're going to be hearing from influencers in the YouTube space today, but about pioneering partnerships. And I wanted to give you one case study from one that I worked on, which was Land Rover, talk about a brand with a rich, crusty heritage, Land Rover. And we knew that heritage could be really powerful, but what was amazing is that they were going to harness it in really modern and relevant ways. And they specifically, their agency specifically said, how can we take the idea of Land Rover as a really rich heritage brand and build a robust YouTube channel and also do some branded content to connect with new buyers. What was really cool about it is that you know, that they came to us and they said, they knew that they wanted partnership ideas. And they said that, you know, a lot of the times brands will come and they'll say, we just want awareness or something like that. They said, no, we actually want to build love. And like, that's not something you often hear, especially from brands that are older. And they said, we want to build familiarity and desire, but we want to do it using YouTube content partners. So what we did is just to figure out, okay, we've got this brand, Land Rover, we've got the platform, YouTube, we know we want to do it. Who can we slot in that's going to be that perfect intersection? And I don't know if anybody in the room knows who Peter Bragiel is, but Peter Bragiel is a content creator on YouTube, super awesome guy. He, you know, makes some very outdoorsy kind of content. It turns out that he had a good friend that owned a Land Rover. There was a good connect, and Land Rover was really into the kind of content he was making and said, why don't you create a 10-part content series on YouTube simply with you in a Land Rover driving across the country called In Transit. You know, and I'm not going to play you a clip of it because you can go and check it out if you want to, but they're very, very simple, just vignettes of him starting up in Tamales Bay, eating some oysters, driving across the country. What's really remarkable about this story for me, and what I thought they did an amazing job of, is saying, we don't want this just to be a YouTube desktop experience. They put it across mobile, they put it across tablets on every device, and they were really open to being nimble with the media plan and how this came to life. So what I want to show you is the last 10 seconds or so of a TV spot that was never meant to be. This was never in the media plans.
When it's over, you clear the trail! Woo! I'm ready to do it again.
The Everyday Explorer, presented by Land Rover. See more of Peter Bragiel in transit at youtube.com/LandRoverUSA.
It's probably the first time I had ever seen a national TV spot drive back to the YouTube experience, and it feels to me like we're going to be seeing more of that. It's like moving water upstream, kind of, where the digital stuff comes first. And for me, that's the amazing part, is today Land Rover's building their brand as a digital creator. And they specifically said, it's not just all about views. We actually don't care how many views we get, which you don't hear very often from brands. We care about connecting the right viewers with the right content. And that, to me, is the key. And you're going to hear a lot more from that from creators, is how do you make sure that what they do is a perfect alignment with what the brand is trying to accomplish? And it's not easy, and not everybody does it well. So the question that I'd leave for this, and you'll hear more about it, is what else can you do? How else can you work to create screen time? Because that's really what these guys do. And what changes when thinking about video in new dimensions with multiple screens, when that behavior is democratized across all of those screens? And I think what Land Rover really had said, and this is a conversation that we had with them and their agency, is we want the Land Rover story to take on new forms and meanings, which is a really nice way of thinking about it. Like, we don't want to tell the same story, we want to do it in a different way. And I think that's a trend we're seeing a lot more of. All right, so final little piece here. Whether your brands or campaigns call to kind of create, curate, collaborate, I think the orchestration piece is really, really key. And this is the case where I want to talk about probably the biggest brand that I'll talk about in the thing, because I think it outlines the example of this really well. So I'm going to be talking about Nike, but I want to talk about it in a way that maybe you haven't heard about it before, I hope. Everything that Nike does, which I'm always very impressed with, is that instead of looking at the event that's going on, they always reflect back on the audience, which is an amazing thing for a brand that size to do. And they don't just focus on what's happening at the Olympics or the World Cup. They don't just have all of these videos of athletes. They actually ask what their audience is doing. And probably the best example of what they did was what they did for the 2012 Olympics. I'll play this again to refresh people's memories.
Greatness, it's just something we made up. Somehow we've come to believe that greatness is a gift reserved for a chosen few, for prodigies, for superstars, and the rest of us can only stand by watching. You can forget that. Greatness is not some rare DNA strand. It's not some precious thing. Greatness is no more unique to us than breathing. We're all capable of it. All of us.
So no doubt, very nice piece of creative. Actually, I've heard that that kid is now in really good shape. I've heard like he really turned his life around. I guess Nike can take credit for that. But at the end of the day, everybody thinks, wow, what an amazing thing for them to have done at the Olympics. Well, I was talking to a friend of mine who works at Wyden at the time, and she said, the really funny thing about that is that work wasn't even created for the Olympics. It wasn't meant for the Olympics at all. It was, in the terms of Wyden, they're allowed to say stuff like this. It was just laying around, a nice piece of content we had laying around. So it must be nice to have that kind of content just laying around like that. But she said, no, it came from the original brief that Greg Hoffman, the VP of Brand Design and Communications, give to everybody for Just Do It, which is potentially the worst brief you could ever get if you're creative. Inspire everyone everywhere to do everything. That's essentially what it says, which is like, oh, thanks, that's really helpful, thanks a lot. But yet, Just Do It comes out of this. So it was really meant as just a regular brand campaign. So a lot of people will say what makes that stuff a success is beautiful creative. And I don't think it's the case. I think that what made it a success is how they orchestrated it. So let me take you through what they did. So July 25th, they thought about it in very discrete stages. We got to launch this content that we have laying around somewhere, so we're going to do a pre-launch. And they invite the user in. If you're Nike, it looks like this. You take that brand message of Find Your Greatness and you make it exclusive content for your influencers across YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest, Google, and everything kind of breaks across social media for the people who are the quote-unquote influencers in that space. Then, of course, you make it social commentary across all the places where people are talking. So you've got your Tumblrs and your Twitters at the time, the bloggers, and you create a Find Your Greatness hashtag, and that whole brand message becomes social commentary. This is all before that piece of content, that very same piece of content that you just saw launched to anybody. It was leaked here. Then, and only then, did they say, okay, now that we've got that content, we linked it to our influencers, now we're going to ignite the campaign. And of course, if you're Nike, when you ignite a campaign, you really ignite a campaign. I mean, they like blasted the universe with every kind of masthead you could imagine, across mobile, across desktop, across everything. They delivered 250 million impressions, 12 languages, 5 million views in a day. Not every brand is going to do that, obviously. If you're Nike, that's how you're going to do it. But the idea of doing a pre-launch and then doing a launch in a massive way is the principle that I think is important. Then, only then, the next day on July 27th, did they say, okay, we did the pre-launch, now we're ready to launch this in mass media. Again, if you're Nike, you're going to put it in 25 countries and do it globally across the world. You don't have to do that with a smaller brand. But the idea is saying, okay, you got a pre-launch. then you're going to launch on digital, then you're going to put it up on TV. That orchestration is pretty, from a media perspective, pretty amazing. They could have stopped there, and a lot of brands do. You got a pre-launch, you launch, you stop. What I think was amazing is what they did post-launch, because they say, okay, we said this, find your greatness stuff. How can we maintain that message? How can we create that dialogue? So they say, we're not prodigies, we're not superstars, but we don't just have to watch.
The mission starts with you. How fast? How high? How quick? How much? You can find greatness with what you earn and what you give. We can make history, but the mission starts with you.
And so what did Nike do? They basically take, we own this Find Your Greatness message. What we're going to do now is then seed it, put it out there, and then we're going to let the user take over and do something with that message. And if you're Nike, it's nice because you have a built-in community already, which goes back to why you might want to think about with smaller brands how you can tap into creators to help make this happen. But this is how they grow the community. They every time say, how can we take that brand message and have it synced with the experience? And each initiative they create grows that community in a massive way. And I think the reason why is because it's about not just that, integration of content. How do we take what we have, just put it up and call it a day, but how do you orchestrate the whole ecosystem to make something cool out of it? And I mean, that's the point. I think like in this day and age, I can make an HD video on my phone. People do it in their basements. So it's not about when you're sitting on content, if you have it, where it can go, but where it really should go and when. And is it the beginning of the journey for the user? Is it the end of the journey? Is it the middle? And then as a brand or as a owner of it, how much of that is up to you and when are you going to be cool just relinquishing control and letting people do that universal authorship piece on it? And that's the hardest thing that I see for brands is, especially big brands, they want to hold on to it and they want to own this, and you say you can't own it anymore. That's not how it works. People are going to do something with it if it's good, and that's what I think is important to remember. And I think Nike and a lot of brands have started understanding that, something that I think we've understood for a long time, that it's really not brands that sell brands, it's people that sell brands. So the last thought I'd want to leave you with is this idea of how do you get more people a reason to believe? And the way that I've simply laid this out, and this is by no means rocket science, is a very simple way of saying the relationship that people have with brands now is looking a lot more like human relationships, where sort of all relationships start off not existing at all, then you get to a place where they exist, like I know your name, you're pretty cool. Then you know that you're known for something. I know what you do or make. I know what you are. Then you get to that cool space where it's something that people actually care about. And then that space that's really ethereal, where it represents you, forgives or defends. And you can probably all think of brands for you that you would defend no matter what. And it's going to be different across people, and it's going to be different across regions. But the idea is, man, if you don't exist and you go to existing, that's huge. From not existing to existing, that's monumental. From going from being known something to something I care about, that's enormous. Everything is exponentially big. And I think that's our job, is how can we move people up that to give more people a reason to believe? And that for me is really ultimately what hypertelling is all about. So I will thank you again. Thank you guys so much for your time.